The Sahel, once considered a peripheral zone in global geopolitics, has now become a flashpoint of conflict, power struggles, and shifting alliances. Stretching across Africa just below the Sahara Desert, this region is grappling with the combined threats of terrorism, state collapse, foreign interference, and internal political instability. At the heart of this crisis is Mali, a country that has seen multiple coups, a French military withdrawal, and now a dramatic reorientation of its foreign policy. Once a key Western partner in the fight against jihadism, Mali has distanced itself from traditional allies and embraced new ones, most notably Russia. Meanwhile, tensions with neighboring Algeria are rising, as diplomatic relations break down and security concerns mount. Mali's involvement in the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, alongside Burkina Faso and Niger, signals a new regional bloc with strong anti-Western rhetoric and ambitions of self-determination. But as isolation deepens and economic pressures grow, a critical question arises: is Colonel Assimi Goïta betting everything on Russia? And if so, what does that mean for Mali, the Sahel, and the wider international order? In this video, we break down the layers of the Sahel crisis, Mali's isolation, the collapse of Algeria-Mali diplomacy, and whether Moscow is becoming Bamako's last and only lifeline. To understand Mali's current trajectory, we need to first recognize its pivotal role in the Sahel region, a belt of countries stretching across Africa that sits at the crossroads of North and Sub-Saharan Africa. Mali, landlocked and vast, is not only geographically central, but also historically significant. From the empires of Timbuktu to its post-independence ties with France, Mali has long been a cultural, political, and economic keystone in West Africa. But in recent years, Mali has also become the epicenter of a worsening crisis. Since 2012, northern Mali has been plagued by armed rebellions, jihadist insurgencies, and cycles of political instability. Multiple peace efforts have failed to bring lasting security. International military interventions, particularly by France through Operation Serval and later Operation Barkhane, initially helped stabilize the region, but public perception shifted. Many Malians came to see these missions as ineffective or even neo-colonial in nature. The situation worsened after a series of military coups in 2020 and 2021, which brought Colonel Assimi Goïta to power. Under his leadership, Mali has taken a sharply different path, expelling French troops, restricting UN missions, and distancing itself from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, a regional bloc that imposed sanctions and demanded a swift return to civilian rule. Feeling politically cornered and ideologically alienated, Mali found common cause with two other Sahelian neighbors, Burkina Faso and Niger, both also under military rule after recent coups. In September 2023, the three nations signed the Liptako-Gourma Charter, establishing the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a mutual defense pact that prioritizes national sovereignty, non-interference, and regional solidarity against terrorism. The AES aims to be more than a military alliance. It represents a shared vision of Sahelian independence from foreign influence, particularly from France and broader Western institutions. It also signals a rejection of ECOWAS, which these states view as overly aligned with Western interests and increasingly irrelevant to their security challenges. Mali's official withdrawal from ECOWAS in January 2024 marked a historical rupture. For the first time in decades, Bamako is seeking regional leadership outside the traditional West African framework, aligning instead with revolutionary rhetoric and anti-imperialist politics, and looking eastward for support. For decades, Algeria and Mali maintained a pragmatic and often cooperative relationship, rooted in geography, shared security interests, and complex ethnic ties, particularly in the border regions inhabited by Tuareg populations. Algeria, the dominant power in North Africa, long positioned itself as a key mediator in West African affairs, especially when instability in Mali began threatening the wider Sahel and Maghreb. One of Algeria's most high-profile diplomatic achievements came in 2015 when it brokered the Algiers Peace Accord, an agreement between the Malian government and various armed groups, particularly Tuareg separatists. Though the deal was imperfect and only partially implemented, it was seen at the time as a diplomatic breakthrough that prevented a full collapse of the Malian state. Algeria's mediation was welcomed by the international community, and its influence in northern Mali grew substantially. However, The fragile peace began to unravel in the years that followed. The rise of jihadist groups, ongoing ethnic tensions, and growing mistrust between local communities and the central government undermined the accord's effectiveness. After the military coups of 2020 and 2021, Mali's new leadership, under Colonel Assimi Goïta, began to recalibrate the country's alliances, shifting away from Western partners and multilateral negotiations, including Algeria's mediation framework. This shift raised red flags in Algiers. Algeria, which has long promoted political dialogue and regional diplomacy, was increasingly uncomfortable with Mali's turn toward military solutions, particularly through the newly formed Alliance of Sahel States, AES. The AES, composed of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, adopted a more assertive, militarized posture and emphasized national sovereignty over international cooperation. Algeria views this regional pivot with deep concern. It fears that the AES could destabilize an already volatile border zone, especially if military operations in northern Mali provoke renewed Tuareg rebellion or spillover effects into southern Algeria. Moreover, Algeria worries that Mali's growing alignment with Russia and its embrace of private military actors like the Wagner Group could introduce new geopolitical rivalries into a region where Algiers has traditionally held sway. The situation came to a head in late 2023 and early 2024. Diplomatic talks between Algiers and Bamako broke down, with Algeria accusing Mali of undermining the 2015 peace agreement and sidelining its role as a neutral mediator. Mali, for its part, viewed Algeria's diplomatic pressure as interference. Trust between the two nations rapidly eroded. In a dramatic move, Algeria closed its border with Mali and suspended several bilateral cooperation agreements. The symbolic and strategic weight of this decision cannot be overstated. It marks a rupture between two states that once shared common regional goals, but now find themselves on diverging paths. This breakdown has further isolated Mali diplomatically, cutting off a key neighbor and pushing it deeper into reliance on its AES partners, and by extension, into the orbit of non-Western actors like Russia. It also deprives the region of one of its few remaining diplomatic channels capable of mediating between insurgents and state actors. What began as a partnership rooted in diplomacy has become a cautionary tale of how quickly alliances can deteriorate when national interests, ideological shifts, and regional strategies collide. The formation of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, marks a profound shift in the geopolitical orientation of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Once considered reliable partners of France and the broader Western security architecture in West Africa, these three countries have now firmly turned their backs on the traditional post-colonial order. The reasons for this pivot are deeply rooted in a combination of historical resentment, failed counterterrorism strategies, and growing anti-Western sentiment across the region. Over the past decade, France spearheaded military interventions in the Sahel through operations like Serval and Barkhane, aimed at curbing jihadist threats. While these missions enjoyed early successes, insurgencies have only grown more entrenched. Entire swaths of territory remain outside state control, and violence against civilians has surged. Public frustration over these outcomes has been amplified by nationalist rhetoric and widespread perceptions that Western powers, particularly France, are more interested in maintaining influence than achieving lasting stability. In this environment, military regimes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have harnessed popular discontent to justify expelling French troops, shutting down Western media outlets, and calling for a complete redefinition of sovereignty. The AES, established in September 2023 through the Liptako-Gourma Charter, represents this redefinition. The alliance was conceived not only as a security pact, but as a political statement, a rejection of multilateral pressure, Western conditionality, and external involvement in domestic affairs. Its members pledged to support one another militarily in the event of external aggression or internal threats, particularly coups against their regimes. This shared military doctrine is both reactive and symbolic. It is reactive in that it directly responds to threats from jihadist groups, secessionist movements, and Western-backed opposition. It is symbolic because it underscores the idea that African nations can secure themselves without foreign troops or interference. AES leaders, especially in Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey, frequently invoke anti-imperialist language. They denounce foreign tutelage and accuse former colonial powers of economic exploitation and political manipulation. Western institutions like ECOWAS are portrayed as compromised by foreign influence, while internal critics are often labeled as agents of the West. What makes the AES unique is not just its composition of military-led governments, but its open defiance of the Western-led international order. These countries are not merely repositioning themselves, they are attempting to redefine the very concept of regional sovereignty in the Sahel. For Mali and its allies, the AES is more than a defensive pact. It is a vehicle for political survival, regional solidarity, and ideological transformation. But the question remains, can this alliance deliver security and governance where Western partnerships have failed? Or is it simply trading one dependency for another? In recent years, Mali has emerged as one of the most visible examples of Russia's expanding footprint in Africa. As Bamako distances itself from traditional Western partners, especially France and the United Nations, it has turned increasingly to Moscow for military, diplomatic, and economic support. This pivot marks one of the most significant realignments in Sahelian geopolitics since the Cold War. At the core of this new relationship is military cooperation. In 2021, shortly after Colonel Assimi Goïta seized power in Mali's second coup in less than a year, reports surfaced of an agreement between Mali's transitional government and the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary organization with close ties to the Kremlin. Despite initial denials, Wagner personnel have since been observed operating alongside Malian troops, especially in the central and northern regions of the country, areas long plagued by jihadist violence and separatist insurgencies. The arrival of Wagner has coincided with the departure of French forces and the scaling back of UN peacekeeping missions. For the Malian junta, Wagner offers a more flexible and politically aligned alternative to Western forces. Russian advisors do not demand democratic reforms, do not criticize extrajudicial operations, and operate under opaque rules of engagement, attributes that appeal to regimes under international scrutiny. In return, Wagner has reportedly gained access to mining concessions, particularly in Mali's lucrative gold sector, illustrating the transactional nature of this relationship. But Russia's influence extends beyond the battlefield. Over the past 2 years, Mali and Russia have signed multiple bilateral agreements covering sectors such as energy, agriculture, infrastructure, and education. Moscow has provided shipments of fuel, grain, and fertilizers to Mali, often presented as goodwill gestures aimed at reinforcing South-South solidarity. Russian diplomats and state media have become more active in Bamako, working to cultivate a narrative of partnership and mutual respect, in contrast to the paternalism often associated with the West. This growing entanglement raises important questions. Is Mali entering a long-term strategic alliance with Russia? Or is this a short-term political gamble by a regime in need of quick results and international backing? From Bamako's perspective, the Russian partnership offers clear short-term benefits. It provides military support without political strings, economic aid without conditionality, and diplomatic cover in global forums like the United Nations Security Council, where Russia has shielded Mali from harsher criticism and sanctions. However, the risks are substantial. The Wagner Group's involvement in human rights abuses across Africa, from the Central African Republic to Sudan, has drawn global condemnation. In Mali, similar accusations have already surfaced, with reports of extrajudicial killings and civilian casualties during joint operations. Such incidents could further isolate Mali internationally and deepen domestic grievances. Economically, while Russian support may be symbolically important, it cannot match the scale or sustainability of Western aid and investment. Mali's long-term development needs, education, infrastructure, healthcare, and institution building, require partnerships that go beyond arms shipments and political posturing. Furthermore, Russia's own capacity is under strain due to its war in Ukraine. Its ability to sustain deep engagement in the Sahel is uncertain. If Moscow's priorities shift or its resources dwindle, Mali could find itself overexposed, having alienated its traditional partners without securing a stable long-term alternative. In this context, the pivot to Russia looks less like a carefully planned realignment and more like a strategic gamble, one driven by immediate needs, political expediency, and ideological defiance. Whether this gamble pays off will depend not only on Moscow's commitment, but on Mali's ability to build internal resilience and regional legitimacy in an increasingly fragmented Sahel. Mali's political and strategic pivot, away from Western alliances, toward the Alliance of Sahel States and Russia, carries major implications for the country itself, for the Sahel region, and for international security at large. While framed by its leaders as a path toward greater sovereignty and regional solidarity, this shift presents a series of serious risks that could deepen instability. The most immediate consequence is diplomatic isolation. By withdrawing from ECOWAS, Mali has severed ties with a bloc that, despite its flaws, has been the principal mechanism for economic cooperation and political mediation in West Africa. Combined with deteriorating relations with Algeria and a confrontational stance toward France, the United Nations, and the broader West, Mali has dramatically reduced its pool of diplomatic allies. This could have severe consequences for trade, development funding, and international legitimacy. At the same time, Malian officials argue that these moves are not isolationist but rather a reassertion of sovereignty. They claim Mali is no longer willing to be dictated to by outside powers that, in their view, failed to deliver peace or respect the country's autonomy. Within Mali and among supporters of the AES, this message resonates powerfully. It reflects a growing frustration with international institutions perceived as detached, ineffective, or compromised. However, counterterrorism efforts may be the greatest casualty of this realignment. The Sahel remains one of the most active fronts in the global jihadist insurgency, with groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State exploiting weak borders and state fragility. The withdrawal of French and European forces, the downsizing of the UN mission, MINUSMA, and the lack of coordination with ECOWAS members mean that Mali's security operations are increasingly siloed. This fragmentation reduces the effectiveness of intelligence sharing, joint border patrols, and regional operations. It also risks giving armed groups new space to maneuver, particularly in transnational zones like the tri-border area between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. While the AES seeks to fill this gap, it remains a fledgling alliance with limited institutional capacity and uncertain long-term cohesion. The reaction of neighboring countries and global powers remains a key variable. Algeria's closure of its border and public condemnation of Mali's path underscores a deepening rift. ECOWAS continues to pressure the AES bloc, warning of further fragmentation and regional unity. France, once Mali's closest security partner, has shifted its focus toward coastal West African countries, where jihadist threats are now rising. The United States, meanwhile, is recalibrating its posture. Concerned about Russia's influence and the rise of military juntas, Washington has suspended security cooperation with some AES states, while maintaining limited diplomatic contact. The broader fear in Western capitals is that the Sahel could become a vacuum, one filled by non-state actors, rival powers, or unaccountable regimes. In this context, Mali's future remains deeply uncertain. Its leaders seek sovereignty and regional leadership, but the costs of alienation and over-reliance on new allies could prove destabilizing. If the current trajectory continues, the country may find itself increasingly disconnected from global institutions and struggling to contain the very threats that drove it to seek change in the first place. Mali stands at a crossroads, between sovereignty and isolation, between regional ambition and internal fragility. Colonel Goïta's decision to pivot toward Russia and the AES is bold, but it carries immense risk. As Western alliances crumble and neighbors like Algeria grow distant, Mali's security and stability now depend on untested partnerships and uncertain loyalties. Can this new path deliver peace where others have failed? Or is Mali trading one form of dependency for another, risking deeper chaos in the pursuit of autonomy? Only time will tell if Goïta's gamble on Russia will pay off, or if it will lead Mali further into the unknown. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis and stories you won't hear elsewhere. Your comments matter. Join the conversation below and let me know what you think.